Looking at the success of the Fortuner and the Endeavour over the generations, one might wonder, is there no space for any other player to enter this segment? Well, the fact of the matter is there is plenty of space, but both these cars are so territorial that they have never really allowed any other vehicle to succeed. Now, we've seen something similar in the sub 20 lakh rupee space as well, with the Seltos and the Creta literally ruling those segments. But it's again segment leading features that have helped them dominate. In the case of these two cars, at their price point, they feel so basic that they make a sub 4 meter crossover look more feature-rich. Now, this is one fact, this is one chink in the armor that every new player that has entered this segment has tried to exploit. We've had the Chevrolet Trailblazer, the Isuzu MU-X, the Mahindra Alturas, and many more that have actually offered a lot more than these two cars, and yet they've never been able to dethrone these cars. Now there is one more player that is going to take on these two brutes. It's the MG Gloster. So we are here to find out how this car stacks up. Does it really have what it takes to take on these two and maybe even dethrone them? Let's find out. I call them brutes because they are large and old school body-on-frame SUVs. And that is the reason why I did not make any mention to the monocoque chassis Skoda Kodiaq. The only car that gave these two giants some serious competition when we compared them in the past. Like the Ford Ranger-derived Endeavour or the Toyota Hilux-derived Fortuner, even the new MG Gloster finds its roots in a pickup truck. The body-on-frame construction helps these SUVs achieve a high level of rigidity and robustness fit for poor road conditions. Enables tons of space inside the cabin and gives these SUVs a typically large demeanor. The Gloster is the largest of the lot, trumping the Fortuner and the Endeavour not only in the exterior dimensions but also in the wheelbase. It is so large in fact that it even makes a set of 19-inch rims look puny, but that is a typical MG design trait, isn't it? The real concern is that the Gloster doesn't have a distinctive style like the Hector brought to the table. If anything, even in the company of the aging Fortuner, the Gloster looks a bit forgettable in its design. But that understated form might appeal to many out there. Also, if you want the largest SUV under a crore, this one is the one for you. The Fortuner seen here is the BS4 model, and while the BS6 variant doesn't look very different, there is an updated Fortuner on its way in 2021 with some revised styling cues. That said, the Fortuner, even in its aging avatar, looks distinctive thanks to its Japanese anime-inspired styling, and it also has a very upmarket poise that is inherited from the Lexus styling cues. The Fortuner Legender variant expected next year could push that envelope even further. Ford Endeavour is aging too. It was a bit of a late bloomer coming to India much later than expected, but its timeless design has continued to work in its favour since the day of its launch. It has a boot stance that no other SUV has been able to replicate, and that gives it a rather unique appearance. The Endeavour seen here looks even more appealing because this is the new sport trim that wears smoky eyes and replaces most of the shiny bits with a blacked out finish that looks befittingly sinister for its size. And if you still prefer the chrome, the regular trims will give you loads of that bling. The bling factor, the size of the grills, the size of the SUVs, that has a very big binding factor on how imposing they look. And that imposing stance is one of the biggest factors that influence people's buying decisions. From that perspective, the Gloster does lose out a bit. It does look elegant and all, but once you look at the rear with all those badges, it doesn't look tastefully done. I think it's the Endeavour that still manages the best balance between a boot stance and an elegant poise. What the Gloster lacks in design flair, it more than makes up for inside the cabin. The blatant BMW inspiration in the cabin helps establish a premium appeal. Contributing further to that effect is the knurled finish on some of the knobs and switches, the generously sized seats with their tan upholstery and quilted stitching, and the massive panoramic roof that makes the cabin look and feel airier and larger than what it is. For similar reasons of making the cabin feel airy, the Endeavour sticks to a beige interior despite this being the blacked out sport trim. It certainly doesn't look as plush as the Gloster or even the Alturas that's absent in this test. But the build quality of the cabin is that of robustness and toughness, just the way its exterior form would suggest. Speaking of go anywhere and the wild outdoors, the chocolate brown upholstery on the Fortuner is certainly more enduring to muck and dust. But in its BS6 avatar, it has been replaced with a black and beige combination. Because as it turns out, the Fortuner's customer is more luxury-oriented than the adventure seeker. Now, if you're a luxury seeker, it is the second row of the Gloster that could actually appeal more to you out of all the three SUVs. The kind of space that it offers, you can already see there's no sort of compromise. Even if you have to sort of make a compromise with the third row seating, it's actually not bad. The space is excellent. The only downside is that the cushioning is slightly on the firmer side. Now, the second row seating in this, the Fortuner as well as the Endeavour, is adjustable for reach as well as recline, but this one offers a lot more range of adjustability overall. And on long distance comfort, I think it's the Fortuner that will actually leave you with better comfort. I know this cabin does come with a massaging function for the driver's seat. There is, however, a small problem. Let's get in the front and let me show you what it is. Just look how much the seat back protrudes out, how much it puffs up when the massaging function is on. Of course, this is meant to give you the deep tissue massage. However, it's uncomfortable to say the least. It almost feels like there's a big pillow between your back and the seat. And over long distances, of course, it's not that great. You're not going to be using the massage function all through the long journey, right? But at the end of that journey, you would want a nice massage. And this one, it's a little bit uncomfortable. So second row space is best in the Gloster, followed by the Fortuner, which is spacious overall but low on headroom, and the ND offers the least amount of room in this lot. The other USP of these SUVs is the third row of seating. Here again, the Gloster has its enormous size to its advantage and offers the best space even for third row occupants, meaning even full-sized adults can sit in comfort. Neither of these cars are meant to take you road tripping with a full house unless you want to mount all that luggage on a roof carrier. With the third row up, there's barely room for about 2 suitcases in each of these, the Endeavour being slightly better, but with the third row folded, that makes a world of a difference. Even when you move past the space and onto the features list, the Gloster continues to lead the race. From automatic wipers and headlights to wireless charging and MG's connected tech with remote functionality, voice commands, navigation, weather and internet music streaming, it has it all. It even has a 12-speaker audio unit and a 64-color ambient lighting to set the mood right. And it is indeed the better audio system of this test. And then there is even more tech with the 360-degree cameras, automated parking and adaptive cruise control. All of this combined makes it the benchmark to beat. The Fortuner or the Endeavour cover the basics, but neither push the envelope nor do they have any feature that really stands out. Even the mid-spec sharp variant of the Gloster outclasses these rivals. The Fortuner and Endeavour have 7 airbags instead of the Gloster's 6. And the ND also gets the automated parking feature just like the Gloster. But the MG goes far beyond that with automated emergency braking, blind spot detection, lane departure and forward collision warnings. Using the iSmart connected tech, the Gloster also allows vehicle tracking and immobilization, speed limiting, geofencing, etc. The Ford My Key allows something similar with a top speed limit, audio volume limit, etc. So the big news for the Gloster is of course the twin-turbo engine that it brings to the table. For the lower-end variants, there is a single-turbo variant of the same 2-litre diesel engine, but in the top-end variant, it is the 2-litre with the twin-turbo configuration, and that configuration also gives it best-in-class power and torque outputs. That immediately shows in the acceleration figures. 11.9 seconds is quicker than both the other cars in this test, and only to be overshadowed by the Alturas, which is not present here. In our test, just to put things into perspective, the Alturas had managed the 0 to 100 sprint in about 11.2 or 11.3 seconds. So that is the quicker engine. That's also the more refined engine. But at least as of now, in this test, it's the Gloster that has the best level of refinement. But despite these class-leading power and torque figures, the roll-on figures are actually not that great. it's the Endeavour that actually has better roll-on figures than the Gloster. Now this is essentially because of the pronounced turbo lag and the lack of proper gearbox tuning that we see in the Gloster. And that is the reason why when you're driving at city speeds under 2000 RPM, there's hardly anything. You're always having to rev the engine, you're always having to make sure that you are in a lower gear, because sometimes the gearbox doesn't do it on its own despite being an automatic, and that is when you'll have to take manual control over the gearbox. To that effect though, it also gets paddle shifters. In fact, the Endeavour is the only one which doesn't get them, which is quite a bit of a downer considering that the new 2-litre engine comes with an amazing new gearbox. Like the Gloster, the big news for the Endeavour is also its engine. In its midlife makeover, it was given the new 2-litre engine, and that sort of polarized a lot of buyers. The 2.2 is gone, the 3.2 is gone. That was the engine that we absolutely loved, and in comes this new 2-litre engine. Now, to put it in a nutshell, the engine feels adequate. The bigger news, however, is the gearbox that it has made it to. It's a 10-speed automatic. Now, that's the same gearbox that I first sampled on the new Mustang, and that time I told you that it will come to other Ford products as well, and the first vehicle that we get it in India is the new Endeavour. Now, no matter what the situation, whether you're crawling in city traffic, whether you're crawling over bad roads like these, or you're out on the highway cruising at triple-digit speeds, the gearbox actually does an excellent job. There's always a ratio. You will never find yourself in the wrong ratio with this gearbox. It is quick to respond, it is quick to downshift, it is quick to upshift, whether you're on part throttle, full throttle. Like I said, in various scenarios, there's always a ratio for it. The ratios from 7 to 10 are of course the overdrive ratios, and that is what you will essentially be using out on the highway, and that also maximizes fuel efficiency by a fair margin. In fact, the 3.2, one of the biggest drawbacks for that engine was its fuel economy, but the new 2-litre fixes that quite nicely. It's also compliant with the BS6 emission norms, and that is again a very good thing. There was, however, another problem that we always associated with the 3.2-litre engine, especially at highway speeds, and that was its ability to pull overtakes, or maybe the lack of it, because the gearbox was always quite slow to respond when you wanted to pull overtakes at triple-digit speeds. Now that is fixed with the new setup. However, because of the smaller engine, we are back to square one, because while the gearbox responds quickly, the engine is a little slow to respond and build up all that power and torque that you need to pull overtake at a highway speed. And that is, well, still a problem with the Endeavour. Like you can see right now, the right gear has been selected, but the engine takes a little while to spool up and give you the kind of power and torque you want. So, well, that problem of overtaking still persists. But otherwise, this new package does everything right. It's always in the right gear. It always has decent amount of power and torque when you're cruising on the highway or driving in the city. And like I said, it has its gains in the fuel economy as well. Some say there's no replacement to displacement, and if you're of that belief too, the Fortuner's 2.8-litre engine is bound to attract you, which is pretty noisy but more responsive than the Endeavour. In terms of engine refinement, the Fortuner is starting to show its age. Of course, take this with a pinch of salt, because the one that we are driving, the one that we are showing you, is essentially the Fortuner BS4. The BS6, with its improved exhaust, improved emissions, will have slightly better refinement as compared to the one that we are talking about. However, it's still not as refined as the engine in the Alturas or the one in the Gloster. It is quite noisy, whether you're driving at city speeds, whether you're driving at highway speeds. There is that constant gravelly note from the engine, and that sort of gets a little annoying, and that shows its age. In terms of the gearbox, however, despite its age, despite its configuration, it is actually one of the more likable gearboxes in this test. Of course, it's not as quick to respond as the 10-speed in the Endeavour, but what it manages with this powertrain, I think the Fortuner is still one of the most likable packages around. It's a very quick gearbox and it marries with the engine quite nicely. The power delivery is effortless, overtakes are quick, and the turbo lag isn't annoying in the city or out on the highway. And in the latter scenario, it will also get into a coasting mode to squeeze out better fuel economy. Here's a quick look at how the overall numbers stack up.
Not everyone who buys a full-size SUV is going to list driving dynamics at the top of their priorities. But if you are the sort of person who enjoys their stint behind the wheel, you are probably going to like the MG Gloster the best. Of the three SUVs here, it's the only one to get a sport mode, and that kind of belies its character. Now, all these SUVs are body on frame, they're ladder frame, and that usually gives an SUV a slightly disconnected feel. The feel that you're floating above the road and not really driving along it. But with the Gloster, you do get a nice tight down feeling, and definitely it's got the tightest body control of all the three here. Of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and for the tighter body control, what the Gloster trades off is a little bit of pliancy in how it deals with bumps. I'm on a cemented road right now, and there's a constant judder that I can feel through the seat and through the base of the car. But that does mean that when you do get to a corner and you're carrying a decent bit of pace, you'll probably feel the least amount of body roll and lean in the Gloster. And your passengers are likely to thank you for that as well.
The Gloster's taut handling and sharper turn-ins come courtesy of a relatively firmer setup and lower profile tires, but sharper bumps and joints can be heard and felt inside the cabin.
Now don't get me wrong, the Gloster isn't a corner carver, not by any stretch, but like I said, it does feel the most sporty to drive despite slightly vague feeling from the steering.
Speaking of the steering, is the Endeavour, which in typical Ford manner has the better driver-focused setup and feedback.
Next on the list, we have the Ford Endeavour. The Endeavour has been a favourite of ours for a long while, just for that feeling of invincibility you get when you're driving it. Now, there is some amount of lean. In fact, if you do try and throw the Endeavour into the corner, it's not going to like it at all. But if you drive it within its capabilities, it's a very capable mile muncher.
While you're at it, it also makes fodder of the rougher stuff in its way, and that ability has only gotten better and better with time.
The Endeavour, of course, is an SUV that's gone through various iterations here in India, and it seems like with each iteration, even within this current generation, the suspension has got just a little softer and a little more pliant. What we now have is an Endeavour that is a lot nicer to live with, but perhaps isn't as tight as it used to once feel.
The Gloster certainly has a tighter body control in comparison, while the Fortuner is the stark opposite of that.
Now, depending on whether you like your full-size SUV to feel like a true blue full-size SUV, you might or might not like the Toyota Fortuner. It's been around for a long time. A lot of people do know what it drives like. In this company, its steering just feels a little too heavy, a little too under-assisted in comparison to the other two, especially at city speeds. So it's going to be the most cumbersome to drive in a city, that's for sure. When it comes to taking U-turns, you do feel the heft of the car. And it does feel old school overall. There is a lot of dive when you get on the brakes, and there is pitch, and there is lean when you get to a corner. But overall, the ride quality is acceptable. It does feel a little more pitchy than the Endeavour. And when it comes to the ride quality, I think the Endeavour just has it spot on.
These are fairly large SUVs. The idea is to give you space, the 7-seater comfort, and of course luxury. But each of these SUVs is also capable of going off-road, far off-road for that matter, to do some serious stuff because they've all got low ratio transfer cases. We've extensively tested the Fortuner and the Endeavour. We've done some amazing things with them over a decade. And the most recent one that I can recollect was when we took it up to Spiti in the winters. And we did some amazing stuff out there. But each of these brings its own unique character when it gets off tarmac. The newest one here, of course, is the Gloster. and it's got an electric shift on the fly 4-wheel drive selector, which means you can move from 2-wheel drive into 4-wheel drive high just by flicking a button, or rather dialing, rotating a knob. Same can be done on the Fortuner and the Endeavour as well, but the Gloster has the most kit because it gives you not just the low ratio transfer case option, but rather than you having to select that option, you can choose to put it into mode depending on the terrain you're going to be driving on, whether it's crawling over rocks, whether it's going through snow, grass, mud, sand. It's got a variety of driving modes, and each of that allows the Gloster to be driven over that particular terrain. Now, the low ratio transfer case can only be actuated when you're in the rock crawl mode. But frankly, I don't see either of these SUVs being used for really hard stuff. For that, you'd want an SUV that has got more compact dimensions, that's far more agile. But it's always good to know that these SUVs are capable of doing a lot more off-road. Now, the Gloster comes with about 210 mm of ground clearance and about 500 mm of wading depth. Both the Fortuner and the Endeavour have a bit more than that. Both the Fortuner and the Endeavour have got 225 mm of ground clearance, and where the Fortuner can wade through water that's almost 700 mm deep, the Endeavour maxes it up by another 100 mm. So the Endeavour has got a wading depth of about 800 mm, which is quite impressive. Each of these SUVs offers more than 400 Newton meters of torque, and that's an impressive figure to have on your side, simply because that allows you to do a lot more when you're off-road, whether you're crawling through sand or breaking through ice or just trying to clamber up a mountain and rocky surfaces. That kind of torque can pull you through almost anything. All of these three SUVs are also automatics, and all three give you paddle shift options, which makes driving it off-road a lot easier, a lot more convenient. The Gloster adds in one more feature, and that is front and rear cameras. So when you are off-road, you can actually see where you need to head if the road ahead isn't visible. You can't unfortunately do that in the Fortuner or the Endeavour for that matter. The Fortuner's 4-wheel drive system is still a bit old school because the Gloster and the Endeavour, they both offer you an electronically lockable differential that gives you a slight edge in hardcore off-roading conditions. For the purpose of this test, we weren't able to take either of these SUVs into too hardcore off-road conditions, and we will eventually drive out with the Gloster as well, and hopefully the Fortuner and the Endeavour, to get a sense of what its off-road abilities are really like. But if I had to give them marks, well, they'd all be pretty high up, but pretty equal to each other as well. Nonetheless, what's important to know is that at the end of the day, in either of these SUVs, when you go off-road, the car does a lot of the hard work for you, and you'd come out on the other side still feeling just as fresh as when you started out that drive.
The Fortuner certainly has an edge when it comes to off-road capability, while the Endeavour and the Gloster only make life easier for the driver by way of aids and assists when driving off the road. We would love to put the Gloster through trickier terrain like we did in the past with the two Brutes, but there is no denying that more than these capabilities, it is the space and the creature comforts which are going to attract consumers to the new MG. While personally, each and every one of us in the OVERDRIVE team would still side with the Fortuner or the Endeavour given how much they have impressed us in the past with their toughness and their reliability, is the Gloster that wins this test because of the points that it scores in various aspects, though by a very small margin. Let us know your thoughts.